Escaping the Fold by Vincent Merkel. The Siren Song continued. The sun went down and the moon appeared, so I tried to sleep. I lay watching the stars follow their futile curve in the great expanse over the white and gray peaks that mark the ends of my castle walls and the beginning of the reef that refused to give way to the advancing tide. The moon hid behind the west wall. My mind drifted to a simpler time. Oh, as a youth, I loved a girl with the innocent kind of love that only a child could claim. The stars in the Milky Way were listening to a lullaby, orchestrated by the frogs of a nearby marsh, accompanied by the crickets and cicadas in the treetops. The rhythm was kept by the far-away waves. With every new swell came a sweet weight that brought my eyelids closer to being sealed. I felt secure, but there was something in the distance. An unnatural noise joined the breeze as my mind was retiring from a day of hunting and hiking. The sound was unnerving, but I had found a very exciting clue as to the previous inhabitant of the cave in which I dozed. His method of climbing a sheer stone face of the mountain was with the use of wooden pegs. The holes that were augured in the wall and mouth of my dwelling were not the only ones on this side of the island. As a matter of fact, 2 miles to the west of my fig orchard, similar holes pocked the smooth granite wall that shot skyward. I deduced that somebody had built a ladder there. The holes in the granite could be fitted with wooden pegs to accommodate steps and overhead handholds. I was thinking about the avenue up the cliff and beginning to fall asleep when the uncanny noise reached me again. It was the most horrible sound. It was like a bad song interrupting the peaceful refrain of nature, full of discord and wailing. It started softly and increased in volume a few miles up the coast. It played rhythmically and slowly moved toward my cove, and it seemed to increase in its intrigue. I could no longer sleep. My nightly rest deserted as trepidation took its place. I thought I heard the sound of a sea chanty that my shipmate Vangelis would sing when preparing our meals in the past. Vangelis had a very bad voice that would make his own mother weep, but this tune was mingled with a sickly sound that was oscillating as if in search of an audience. It was like the stinging of an angry wasp to my senses. In it I heard George calling as if lost on a distant shore. The voices of my mates were strained and distorted, but I knew the authors of the tones emanating from the wailing and sad song. It was so sad that my heart was inspired to quell its despair or mute the source. The full moon began to peek out from behind one of the cove's sentry walls. It was clear that it would soon sit directly in between my 2 guardian cliffs, and the already breaking light from the night's orb began to illuminate my haven. I jumped to my feet and began frantically gathering my belongings into a pile in the far corner of the abode and covered them with the stones. The moonlight was revealing my location to the masters of the night. The sounds increased in volume as the dreaded singer approached. My ability to think became muddled. I fought to keep myself from rushing headfirst into the siren song. I quickly cut some wads of leather from my bedding, rolled them tightly, and stuffed them into my ears. It was a relief, and I regained my powers of reasoning. I would tease Vangelis when he cooked our meals and hummed his tunes, that his voice caused my ears to bleed, paint to flake from the hull of the ship, and angels to fall from the skies to their deaths due to his lack of talent. I would gladly hear his songs now, after the rancorous noise that still echoes to this day in my very being. I transformed the lion's skin from my bedding into a coat that hugged my back, extending beyond my head when draped over my shoulders. The lion's neck was my neck, his back was my back, and his breast was mine. I used the lion's tail as a belt. I found that my new skin played in the moonlight to reflect my surroundings. I was invisible. I reached into my pile of deep red clay and painted my face, neck, arms, and hair to hide my blonde beacon that might give my position away. With bow in hand and spear and quiver on sling, I was guided by the light of a full moon. I crept towards the outer banks. There I would find the author of the advancing sound. I stayed in the tree line and stalked a mile or so to the east. The sounds tore into my head, begging me to answer them with a scream and an oath. I could barely stay my tongue. I cut off the remaining leather from the invisible pelt's extremity and tied it across my head to cover my ears further. Then I could think. I carefully scanned the beach, vigilant not to glimpse further than an inch at a time. I didn't want to be trapped by the eyes of the woeful singer. The sound moved methodically to the west. I saw a ripple in the water that brought my eye to the torso of the dreaded one. I knew he was looking for me. I knew he would be the reason for the discord. He had a plan. I had angered him before. A childlike part of me, the unknowing part that gave in to my fear, had cowered to my hunger and sense of self-preservation. But the child that delights in stories of serpents and heroes, who has a natural loathing for those creatures that spell out lies, answered his song. I drew back my bow string fitted with an arrow slightly bent from unsuccessful practice at a bird inland. I pulled the bow to the extreme and pushed my muscles to their limit. Quickly the shaft sped, and a sound of wood deflecting off of rock shattered my falsely placed sense of security. It was quiet for a second, and then a slow, twisted imitation of laughter filled the air and shook my jawbone. Thunder cracked from the beast's dripping lips. I could smell a mechanical effluvium that was like molten steel and sand. Had he trapped me? No, not in a physical sense, although I felt compelled to stand perfectly still behind the dune. I entertained the idea that he hadn't seen me, and I must have been right, because in my compensation for the slight bend in my arrow, the creature focused his gaze and voice to the east of where I hid. I saw flies, lit by the moon and a glint from his eyes, swarm upon the dune of his contemplation. I heard a very faint humming, but was otherwise deafened by the thunder and leather in my ears. I had to know what he was saying. I slowly pulled the wad of leather from my right ear, just enough to hear the sound of my breath. He was mocking me. "Oh, but that you know a hardened heart when you pierce one, mighty Cupid," he spoke. "I have been struck by your arrow straight and true." Wherever he cast his voice, his gaze was always in that same direction, and when he spoke, the winged insects in the glow of his eyes accelerated their movement and multiplied in their numbers. "What a wound indeed," he soliloquied. "Thou hast truly pierced my heart. I, the one that saved you and brought you safely to the shore. I, who saved your mates and placed them, as scattered as the planks of the deck you once walked, to islands like this, as far and wide as the storm that left you without mercy, adrift in the sea. Come, look into my eyes, that I might show you how they fare, and how they feast and drink of my providence." I called out below the tops of the dunes to a white rock, big enough for 2 men to hide behind, in an attempt to keep my voice from betraying my position. I was generous with my sarcasm. "Bravo! Bravo! I knew you were no god, but an actor in a scene. And what an actor! For what god bleeds and is pierced through the heart by the arrow of a man? Could it be that there is a God that knows not the name of his disciple? You are not without your power, O black thespian of the night. Tell me, to whom do I owe my applause, and how do I give my gratitude for a banquet prepared by loving hands, or tentacles, should I ask?" I slowly moved towards the dune that he was facing, hidden well by my divine camouflage, fully aware that the secret to his name was in the snakes that slithered from his body. He shifted with a swish of his massive tail, anchored somewhere in the depths of the wind-swept sea. It appeared as if he was turning into a she before my very eyes, but the transformation was too difficult a task, the metamorphosis incomplete, a never-ending endeavor, his personal hell of never being true to form. It was trying to change nonetheless, and it was as if the creature could not control it. The shape shifted back to its previous form. It now faced my original hiding place and answered me. "Come now, Cupid, there is no need for timidity. I am not bleeding, so no god bleeds this night. You can thank me by letting me look at your eyes, if just for but a moment. Let me show you what I know, so that you may know that I am God. Then I shall give you my name and a token to prove that your loyal crew lives and awaits your return. Then you can fulfill your debts to me." A cloak of snakes wriggled about and waded in the water around the dark beast. He coughed and said these words, "O vangelis zi ke magirevi, ke to traudi tu latrevi." His eel-like head featured a flared ape's nose. As he sucked in the air, the swarm of insects basking in his light were pulled into his nostrils. His head reeled back, and his body took the shape of a woman of his hideous species. From serrated lips he spat the swarm out, and began to oscillate that fearsome voice across the dunes to my direction. I had forgotten that I had dropped my ear protection at my original hiding place, and as he spoke, I was already making my way to the east towards the pool where I had eaten my first meal on the island. When he began to wail, I quickly opened my little blade and cut a little swath of hide and stuffed it in my ear as the sound increasingly destroyed my rationale. I was sorely tempted to run out and look the beast in the eye. As I rolled on my back in the sand, my muscles fought against me. My flesh was betraying me to answer that song. In the discord, the creature told me who it was. I pulled the leather headband tightly around my ears and regained my composure. It was evident in the monster's shape, song, and knowledge that the origins of this creature were the same as those that the great Odysseus battled thousands of years before. I remembered the name from a tale that my loving mother once read to me as a babe as she taught me her language. I knew that if I had succumbed to that song and the hypnotic trance, I would become its feast, or a lost scrambled shell of a man who would work evil for an ancient creature. Lernea Hydra was a bastard offspring of a long-lost pagan god who would make me the shame of the womb of my mother. Lernea Hydra. I can laugh about it now. Lernea Hydra, that pitiless beast had evolved enough to punish me for Vangelis singing on a shore different from mine. Lernea's words to me were in Greek, but he learned his screeching notes from his cousin and counterpart, the Siren, an eater of men trapped in her woeful song. The words of the new ditty, however, were a parody of a deliberately botched poem that translated, "Vangelis lives and cooks and loves his song." The original version of this song was sung millennia after Lernea had mastered the Siren song. Ancient captains avoiding the wrath of the Gorgons for the death of Alexander the Great, with a similar rhyme in the ancient dialect, presented the poem as a lie to the frightful mermaids of the sea. It translates as follows: Alexander lives as king and governs. If the mermaids thought that Alexander the Great was dead, they would destroy the passing ships and torment the drowning sailors. It is a bit confusing only because Lernea was a liar by nature. His allusion that Vangelis was alive was an insinuation of my mate's death, a cynical jab at my ineffectual attack upon Lernea with my bow and wayward arrow, not intended to be a commentary on the death or life of my shipmate. But Lernea's words were true. The intent of the poem was an admission of a liar's tongue. He knew that Vangelis lived and simply called me a coward by feigning fear with a supposed lie to avoid my silly wrath. Poems provide a media to communicate ideas, and the idea that the beast was trying to convey was that he was aware of both history and his place in the minds of men. He was both testing my intellect and mocking my ignorance. But if the beast knew that Vangelis sang, then I knew that Vangelis had found safety and sustenance. I called out again from behind the rocky outpost, "I see you have been learning to harmonize with Vangelis. Only the likes of you could find joy in a voice that brings angels to their deaths. Please refrain from your refrain. So, Lernea, did my compatriot offer his song to you as thanks for a feast such as you prepared for me?" His prying lights luminesced through fissures in the stone outcropping that was my shield. I interrogated him further as to his need to capture my attention in those spell-binding eyes. "Do you keep an account of favors owed to you on your digits? Have you an office with scripts that can only be unfolded by men? Tell me why you have called me out to this conference. Surely, as you have said it, I have something that you want, and I see that you have no hands." He knew that I stood behind the fractured monolith at the tree line. I was confident that I could have snuck out and avoided his gaze, and I was reticent about removing my ear protection again for fear of the maddening cry of the siren. Behind my rock shield there were 2 stout trees, in between which I was sandwiched. I would not yet remove my wads of leather to hear, but needed to know his response, and shouted again, "Come now, Lernea, let me thank you by offering you a look into my eyes, that which you desire for some mysterious, and I am sure selfless reason." I watched as the dark, slithering beast aligned his body with the crevice between the split rocks, 40 feet straight ahead in the shallows, while I taunted him. I jammed my spear in the crotches of the trees behind me to create something of a bar, pinning me between them, the spear length, and the stone. I was going to deliver another arrow, this time with a straight shaft tipped with obsidian, but I would have to look at the spell-binding eyes to align my projectile with its target. If I lost control of my functions from being seduced by Lernaire, at least the bar would keep me from walking straight into his clutches. He was speaking, and I had to hear. I loosened the plug from my ear. Being pinned made it difficult to draw the bow to full power, but clever use of the irregularity of the shape of the stone and leaning back against the spear allowed for ample power to be generated by my arm, now drawn back with fletching nestled between my straining fingers. The bowstring was tight, and I sighted down the shaft of the arrow. The black obsidian tip sparkled in the light of the moon, and aligned with the eye of the beast. I awaited my answer. I saw Linnæa's blue light and lowered my eyes to the ground when they began to roll upward into my head. The dragon's spell was stitching a stream of instructions again. I heard and felt one of my teeth crack in my mouth as I clenched my jaw and strained to fight the beast's magic. I shut my eyes and heard the swarm of flies on the other side of the stone, basking in their lord's unholy affection. He spoke. "It is a name, Cupid. The name leads to names, and nameless men fall every day. Every moment that passes, it is a name that I desire. When using mine, do so with reverence, for I have buried countless mortals, and their souls have not gone in vain, for they have served my purpose well. The company I keep is in the deep, and a vessel of mine must be filled. Yes, but I have refrained from my refrain and honored your request. Now honor your gift to me. Open your eyes, or shall I sing for you again?" My arm was aching from holding the arrow and bowstring back, shaking from the burning pain only a strained muscle knows. I opened my eyes and let the light in. The obsidian speck at the end of the arrow shaft was blocking out the light from Linnæa's blue lens. I released the string, and the black sharp stone missile found its mark. Linnæa issued forth a sound like that of a vacuum being filled with air. It was a sucking noise that disappeared as the arrow vanished into the blue light emanating from his pierced socket. That one blaze of hateful fire extinguished. Lightning cracked from under the water where he waited, and a volume of it came raining down upon me, washing the mud from my head. Linnæa reeled up, rising to what may have been his full height. He was supported by a massive tail, and the sight I saw was the most gruesome sight ever witnessed by my poor eyes. As I freed my spear from the trees and turned to run into the forest and protective cover of the jungle, the mighty Gorgon raised higher, reaching a height of over 30 feet. Hanging from around his waist, about the point of what may have been his navel, was the body of a woman, gray and torn in half along her length, obviously having been attached there and drowned for quite some time. Her limbs and insides hung over the surface of the water, and her neck twisted downward and bobbled limply with dangling head and eyes that reflected the beast's blue light. I do not know what was pinning the unfortunate victim of Linnæa, the very face of evil, to the serpent's underbelly. I shudder to even think about it. As the grotesque snake-wielding torso with the jaws of a moray eel came crashing back down into the water, it shrieked with rage, "Witness the fate of your mother! You have not begun to understand. I have spared you the menace of my armies, but now I will make you mine, and you will be delivered to me by my children. I will give you the gift of my love and tenderness, and that will be my punishment for your affront to me, Cupid." Light flowed from one of his eyes, and an enormous wave created by his smashing back down into the now turbid water washed me from my feet and carried me out of range of the safety of the edge of the woods. A dip in the sand dune gave way to the water returning to the sea and washed me 15 feet closer to the outraged Linnea. I scrambled to run back into the woods. As I was regaining my foothold on the shifting sand, he delivered a blow from a rope-like extremity that sliced diagonally across the top of my head. The air broke with the signature sound of a bullwhip, and I felt the warm blood spilling from my head over my leather wreath and into my eyes. The leather band that held my ears safe from the torture of Linnea's noise pollution may have saved my life, as it interrupted the length of the laceration across my scalp and kept the monster's tentacle from removing a substantial portion of my face. I ran as swiftly as a deer to the trees and beyond, in a direction away from my home. I turned momentarily at a safer distance and yelled out and laughed at Linnea. "You have still to learn my name, O weak sea cucumber of the deep. What a soft touch you have! I fulfilled my contract with you. Do not solicit my eyes again, because the next time you see me, motherless defiler of excrement, might very well be the day of your death." Linnea was wounded, but proud. It was obvious from the laughter he mimicked, deranged and mottled with an air of disparate tones. He cursed and ranted up and down that entire coast for hours, until he became bored or hungry or whatever it is that evil serpents become. I looked down from a perch on a cliff near the sea that I had discovered 2 days before to the east of the altercation, and saw the water illuminating with electrical charges like lightning from under Linnea's body. His form shifted between all of his known contours, but he always pretended the female profile when singing the Siren song. As the lightning struck through the water, fish surfaced belly up. When the beast disappeared back into the darkness that he came from, assumedly forced by the morning light, I sprinted home to dress my wounds. Sitting upon a ledge, I had emptied my full flask of water, less a few swallows onto my scalp. I feared the disease that Linnea might have transmitted to me. I knew that poison and rot were amongst his favourite weapons. I sat with a leg of my dungarees cut off and tied around my jaw and scalp. Once home, I removed the blood-soaked jeans, washed the 5-inch-long gash in my head again, and tried to comb my hair with a thin, clean, whittled stick on either side of the cut. Satisfied that my hair was neatly separated, I cleaned it again with the cleanest of water and patted my head dry with the other leg of my jeans, cut away at the thigh for the purpose of dressing my wound. I then used a method to close the cut in my scalp that an old friend had taught me. The old Greek doctor's words rang in my memory. He told me what to do in case of a laceration to the scalp and no help to mend it. I thought he was mad, teaching his art at a fine dinner party, but I listened years ago to that rambling man, and his advice spared me from a prolonged recovery. I used my long hair on either side of the deep wound as stitching. I tied my hair strands together from either side of the tear. Tight knots over the cleaned wound bridged the gap and stopped the bleeding. In a few days, the injury would only be a nuisance. Over the mountains and far away. What a strange thought at that time elsewhere in the areas of the civilized and not so civilized world. For those with law and order or war and chaos, anonymity and privacy were things of the past. On an average, people who ventured from their homes were recorded 18 times a day. Cameras in the marketplace and routers in people's homes kept a record of the movement and thoughts of all of humanity. What they liked or despised was a matter of record. It was an oddity that I was in a place far from the observation of those who might rescue me. I felt very alone. As my head healed from the lashing of the Gorgon, I began to set in motion my plan for escape, if not from the island, from the menace of the aberration of the deep.